Australia is spending hundreds of billions of dollars on submarines, missiles and warships. But what happens if we run out of fuel?
With oil shipments limited through the Strait of Hormuz.
The global energy crisis is beginning to bite in Australia with
more and more fuel stations are short of fuel.
600 petrol stations dry.
Farmers can't farm, fishermen can't fish, builders can't build, but hardworking Australians don't panic.
We don't have fuel and we don't know when we're going to have fuel next.
Our fuel stockpile is well below the international standard.
Australia only has 30 days of fuel.
We are completely unprepared for this.
The Defence Force's fuel reserves are the national fuel reserves. There's no separate military holding of reserves. If we get to a point where we're rationing fuel, Defence is going to be bidding for its access to the same fuel as the Australian community.
Oil isn't just an energy issue, it's critical defence infrastructure. If Australia finds itself in a conflict, without fuel, our military would quickly grind to a halt. Queensland Premier David Crisafulli wants to restore Australia's sovereign fuel industry, drilling, refining and storing oil domestically again.
There are some things that you have to control in terms of your own sovereignty. A nation like Australia shouldn't be subject to the whim of what's happening in the Middle East. Never again should we be in this position where we are there at the end of a line begging for some scraps to fall off the table when we've got our own opportunity to do it. That's absurd.
But can one state's oil supply actually strengthen Australia's national security? I'm Pikos, and today we're talking tactics. The fuel front. One of the biggest misconceptions about defence is that wars are won by whoever has the most advanced weapons. Technology matters, but history shows wars are rarely decided by technology alone. They're also decided by logistics and by sustainment. Eventually, every military faces the same question. How long can we keep fighting? Every piece of military equipment depends on fuel. Fighter jets burn aviation fuel, warships consume marine fuel, tanks, armoured vehicles and logistics trucks all run on diesel. Without fuel, the most sophisticated military in the world becomes little more than an expensive collection of parked vehicles. Just take a look back at World War II. During the Battle of the Bulge, elite German panzer divisions literally ran out of fuel and were forced to abandon their tanks, ultimately dooming the offensive. The Soviet army captured Romanian oil fields, instantly depriving the German military of 1/3 of its total oil supply and critical aviation fuel, which eventually led to the paralysis of the German mechanized division and the grounding of the Luftwaffe. A similar situation happened with the Japanese and the German Afrika Korps. If we're not careful, Australia could face similar problems. Despite being a major energy producer, Australia exports much of its crude oil overseas while importing most of the refined fuels we actually use, including petrol, diesel and jet fuel. We now have just 2 major oil refineries remaining, leaving us heavily dependent on overseas refining and international shipping routes to keep the country moving. Australia consumes around 44 million litres of petrol and 92 million litres of diesel every day, which equates to roughly 1.15 million barrels of oil daily. We've already got new warnings about potential fuel rationing in September due to the Strait of Hormuz closure, but what if there was a major conflict closer to home? What if our own shipping lanes through the Malacca or Sunda Straits were disrupted? We'd be faced with even higher prices at the Bowser, but we could also be asking ourselves a much bigger question. For how long could the Australian military sustain operations and successfully defend the country? Months? Weeks? Days? The Crisafuelli Oil Plan. Queensland Premier David Crisafulli believes the answer starts in Queensland.
This is a once-in-a-half-a-century opportunity for us to control our own sovereign destiny again. I want to see a time in this nation when we return to drilling and refining and storing our own fuel.
Drilling, refining and storing. 3 parts of the process that strengthen the entire fuel supply chain. If we can produce and hold our own supplies, we will be less dependent on overseas supplies and better positioned to support ourselves during a crisis. So how does Premier Crisafulli plan to deliver this? Drill, baby, drill. The first part of the plan is simple. Produce more of our own oil. The Queensland government argues that if Australia wants genuine fuel security, we need to increase our ability to produce the resources we rely on. That means encouraging more exploration, opening up new areas for potential development, and supporting projects like the Taroom Trough.
This is the first oil field to be developed in this country for over half a century. Welcome to the Taroom Trough. We are standing above a sea of oil, our golden opportunity to deliver liquid gold for this state.
The Taroom Trough is a large petroleum basin in Queensland with potential domestic oil resources. Supporters argue that unlocking projects like this could create jobs, attract investment, and reduce Australia's reliance on overseas suppliers.
We should know by the end of the year just how much oil lies beneath the state's surface. Experts are predicting the site could produce hundreds of millions of barrels of oil to be extracted as early as 2028.
Early technical assessments indicate that it could produce up to 1,000 barrels of oil per well per day. Depending on the number of wells, which some developers say could number anywhere from 200 to 500, that could be hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil in a day. This could be a sizable chunk of Australia's domestic needs. But the crude oil that comes out of the ground isn't what we fill up our fighter jets, trucks, or Navy ships. It has to be transformed first. Refine and restore. Crude oil is just the raw ingredient that needs to be refined into usable fuel. Without a sovereign refining capacity, producing more oil alone does not solve Australia's fuel security problem. We have just 2 oil refineries, Ampol in Brisbane and Viva Energy in Geelong. We used to have 8 until it became more economical to import already refined fuel from overseas. Together, those 2 refineries are estimated to supply around 10% of Australia's liquid fuel needs, with the vast majority of our petrol, diesel and jet fuel still coming from overseas refineries. In a crisis, those imports become expensive, can be delayed, or can be cut off entirely. Crisafulli's proposal raises the possibility of rebuilding that capability by encouraging new refinery investment, expanding existing facilities, and processing more Australian crude domestically. They have introduced the Accelerating Fuel Infrastructure program to attract private investment into new fuel projects. They have a vision to see new refineries and storage tanks in 6 new locations across Queensland, and will be potentially opening up state-owned land to private companies to build these facilities.
And what this is saying to industry, Queensland's open for business. So we've got 6 really good, well-structured, deep water ports up and down the coast. And we want the private sector to come to us with their solutions and that potential to be able to store and potentially even refine our own fuel and control our own destiny again.
In addition to just unlocking the land, the Crisafulli government is also in discussions to actually open up a new refinery in Queensland.
We are in discussions with several proponents around building a fuel refinery here in Queensland.
The Premier says that refinery could be in the Gladstone region.
So there's a plan to unlock land in key locations in Australia, discussions about building the first new oil refinery in the country in over 60 years, and then there's the plan to store that refined oil for when we need it. A strategic stockpile. Even if Australia does begin producing and refining more oil, we still need enough fuel on hand to survive a disruption. That means expanding strategic fuel reserves and storage facilities, including at the 6 proposed deep water port locations. Storage doesn't create fuel, but it buys time. A fuel reserve can give a nation the ability to continue operating while supply chains are disrupted, shipping routes are threatened, or new sources of fuel are brought online. The question in a crisis wouldn't just be, do you have fuel? It would be, do you have enough fuel to keep fighting? Will this increase our national security? So, will David Crisafulli's plan actually make Australia more secure? I think the obvious answer to that is yes. Fuel is a critical piece of the defence infrastructure pipeline, and building a larger sovereign capacity to produce that is going to make the country more secure. We've seen this kind of transformation before. Over roughly 15 years, the United States went from being a major oil importer to becoming the world's largest net exporter of oil through the shale oil revolution. By combining horizontal drilling and fracking, vast reserves of oil trapped in shale rock was unlocked, and it transformed America into the world's top energy producer and a leading global exporter. You know what other country has vast shale oil reserves currently untapped, sitting there waiting to be extracted? Yep, Australia has an estimated 403 billion barrels of shale oil waiting to play its part in our own shale revolution. Australia may not replicate the US model exactly, but it does show that energy systems can change dramatically with the right policy settings. I think Australia should aim to become self-sufficient in liquid fuels within 20 years. That doesn't mean every Australian needs to drive a petrol car forever. In fact, increasing electrification of the passenger vehicle fleet would reduce domestic fuel demand, allowing more of our own liquid fuels to be prioritised for freight, agriculture, mining and defence, where electrification remains much harder. In my own household, we've taken that approach. I drive a diesel vehicle while my wife drives a Tesla that's charged from the solar panels on our roof. It's about having options if one energy source is disrupted. Australia needs to think the same way. We should be building optionality into our national energy system rather than putting all our eggs in one basket. Because the reality is that wars are not only won by whoever has the most advanced weapons, they are won by the side that can produce more, sustain more, and keep its forces operating for longer. Without fuel, even the world's most advanced military platforms eventually become ineffective. So, what do you think? Is fuel production, refining, and storage essential to national security? Should it be treated as critical defense infrastructure? Do we need to expand our sovereign oil operations? And importantly, should the rest of Australia follow Queensland's lead and develop a national fuel security strategy? As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check me out on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok for hot takes on the news. That's it for today. I'm Pikos, and we've been talking tactics.